Hello and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics Podcast. My name is Jen Stone and I am one of the principal security analysts here at SecurityMetrics, here today to talk to you about MSPs. David Sims is my guest, and David, I neglected to get a bio from you, so tell people about yourself.
Yeah, I'm just a guy on the edge of the internet. I mean,
True. Yep, true.
Yeah. So in short, I am the owner of HIPAA for MSPs. And so we teach MSPs how to navigate HIPAA compliance internally for themselves, as well as what their clients really need from them to have a proper privacy and security program.
Yeah. You also are co-hosting the Help Me With HIPAA podcast with Donna Grindle, who we've had on this show a couple of times, 3 times now, I think. And so you put that, how often do you put that one out? Is it every 2 weeks?
Every week.
Every week.
Yeah, every week. So yeah, Donna Grindle is my co-host on the show.
Make sure she knows that.
Yep. I have to pick at her. If it weren't for me, we wouldn't have this podcast. So as she often says, I come up with the ideas and then make her work.
That sounds about right, actually.
Yeah. So this was definitely a labor of her love. And I was like, you should definitely put a podcast together and I'll be there to be funny.
Are you holding up your end of that bargain?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. We, our tagline is we make HIPAA and humor fun. And so I think we do a good job of that. But yeah, so that podcast has been running for almost 9 years now, 450 some odd episodes at this point. So great information there. And then my day job that puts the food on the table is I actually run an MSP. And have been in business since 1998 and different variations of that. So not the MSP business, but in the IT business since 98.
So I think you're the perfect person to talk to on this topic. And Help Me With HIPAA, the podcast, is actually how I got to know both you and Donna, and got involved in getting to go out and participate in your boot camp a little bit. So just for if you're a listener who is in the healthcare space and you haven't yet listened to the Help Me With HIPAA podcast, I 100% recommend it. It's one of the few podcasts that I listen to every episode of. So you guys are doing just great work out there with that.
Yeah, I think it's the absolute best podcast out there.
So, all right. Okay, good to know. So let's back up a little bit for people who might be listening and saying, okay, that all of that is fine, but what in the heck is an MSP?
Yeah, sure. So managed service provider is what it stands for, and that's usually the company or the organization firm that you bring in when you're wanting to outsource your IT department. So you have them doing your help desk, and you have them doing your cybersecurity to a certain level, and they become your go-to, as some people call them, the IT guys. All IT. So that's what an MSP typically does. Come in and they provide their services. They wrap management around them. So instead of saying we're going to put anti-malware in your computers and then call me if you have a problem, we come in and we look at those things and have those reports coming back to us and monitor and manage those things to make sure we're catching any kind of issues that you may have proactively.
Okay. One of the questions that I'll frequently get is what's the difference between an MSP and an MSSP with the 2 S's P? And is there any difference, and what is that about?
So that's a kind of a somewhat of a confusing conversation within the industry even.
Yeah. Because
some people call themselves MSSP and some people are an MSSP and don't know. I don't know. So my definition is that if you're doing strictly security services, you're not providing help desk, you're not fixing the printers and all this kind of stuff. You're doing strictly cybersecurity, and you have people typically on staff that they're responding to security incidents and have a higher degree of understanding of cybersecurity. My definition is that's when you're an MSSP.
So that's more like an MSSP is more like an outsourced security operations center.
Exactly. Yes. Now, then what makes it a little more confusing is that I have an outsourced SOC that I have. So I bring that in and I use it for my clients. Now, I personally don't call myself an MSSP because what I'm kind of doing is I'm I'm buying the services of an MSSP so that my clients get that benefit, but I don't call myself an MSSP, just like I wouldn't call myself a software provider just because I'm selling Microsoft licenses.
Right.
but that's me. There are certainly people out there that call themselves that, and I wouldn't get too hung up on the acronyms. Just figure out what they're doing for you.
Right. And that was going to be my next question, because an MSP, it feels like it could potentially be a broad set of things, or you only might need a subset of things. How do you recommend people go about choosing an MSP and then and understanding what it is they're doing?
Yeah, you ask these hard questions. Why are you doing this?
I'm so happy to get you on here to torture you with hard questions.
I mean, honestly, it's like every one of these could be its own episode, because there's a lot that goes into choosing the proper MSP, and it does kind of start with, well, what are you looking for? What do you need?
Yeah.
And then going from there, and oftentimes people start at the wrong place, which is usually, how much can I afford?
Yeah.
Which is the kind of the wrong question to be asking first. Mm-hmm. So it's around, what do you need? Do they have a focus within your particular vertical? Is very helpful. So if you're in finance, maybe you're an accounting firm or something like that, and somebody who has a deep knowledge in that area, that would certainly be one that I would recommend looking at. Not to say that there's not others out there, but look at that, because they typically have more knowledge in those areas. Same thing with like healthcare and such. And then understand what kind of services they will be providing for you, and then what that looks like in depth. I think the biggest issue that I typically see is people don't understand fully what they're paying for and what they're getting. And there's a big disconnect. Oftentimes clients could think, well, IT's doing all these things because I pay them to do all these things. And client in the IT department or the MSP saying, we don't do half those things that you think we're doing. And you typically don't know that until something goes wrong. And then there's these conversations that are had about who's doing what and who's responsible for what. So having those conversations up front is crucial.
Right. And it seems like not just up front, but kind of in an ongoing way. I think at least an annual revisit of, what are we doing for you? And has your company changed at all? Do we need to look at some additional things? Probably a helpful thing. I know you were mentioning the other day something about you're working with a customer maybe, or had talked in the industry where they'll say, oh, nothing's happening, we don't have any problems, so we don't think we need you, or we don't think we need these services. Is that something you hear a lot? And how can you help people understand the value of some of the, like maybe the security issue things that you do for them?
Yeah, I don't hear that a lot. Usually when it does come up, it's around contract renewal time.
Oh.
Because then they start saying, well, I don't think we're using these services, so can we cut some of these out and save some money? And it's typically around security. And, it's one of those things where I usually tell people in the very beginning, you don't want to hear from us a lot. That means we're doing a great job. If from a security standpoint, if you're hearing from us a lot, that means, you have to start questioning things. What's going on?
Right.
Because we should be preventing a lot of things happening. Now, you could argue that maybe we should communicate every single time we're blocking things, and that way what's going on. But at the same time,
that would raise costs on that a bit, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So it's a balancing act. Like, how much information do you want to know, and how disruptive do you want us to be in your environment? Because if you want to know every single time there's a security incident we stop, we're probably going to talk every day.
And most companies don't want that.
Right. And so it's a challenge for us, because I want you to understand, if you're a client, I want you to understand the value of what we're providing and what we're doing for you. And I think you need that proof, because there's certainly companies out there that are selling snake oil, so to speak.
Yeah.
They're quote unquote protecting you until they're not.
Right. And you don't know it until you have a massive issue.
Right. You have no idea. And so it's a good idea to get in front of that and to have those discussions. But I also think there's a better time and place for it. So for me, I like to come in maybe quarterly. Like, let's sit down and kind of go over everything that happened this past quarter. And so I might say, hey, in this past quarter, you had, 10,000 attempts to get into your network, and we blocked all of them. And oh, by the way, you had a few attempts at business email compromise or whatever it happens to be, and just bring all that up then, rather than waiting till it's contract renegotiation time.
Right. And then I think one of the focuses that I wanted to take here is we have a lot of listeners who are in the healthcare space, and you have a tremendous amount of expertise in the HIPAA world. So MSPs for HIPAA, feels like there's things there that your regular MSP may or may not know they need to do for you. How can people in the healthcare space choose an MSP that is going to cover some of these technical things that HIPAA requires, and how do they know how to communicate that to them? So it seems like there's a kind of a back and forth there, where you might not even know what you're asking for if you fall under HIPAA, and then you tell an MSP, hey, we need you to do HIPAA, and they say, yeah, sure.
I would love to say we have solved that problem in MSPs, but we have not. There's still a major disconnect between what is required and what people assume and what they've heard. And that goes back to your previous question about how do you ensure you're hiring the right MSP. That's a difficult thing to do. Now, one thing that we have done within HIPAA for MSPs is we did partner with a healthcare accreditation firm to develop an actual course and certification that's not an IT certification, it's an actual healthcare certification for MSPs, so that it is a indicator that they have a higher level of training and understanding of HIPAA. So that's one thing you can look for, and it's called the CHMSP.
Okay.
It's a credential that they can get. So that's one thing to look at and look for. But the other aspects that you can do, there's usually some questions that you can ask that can give you an indication of how much they might know. And so these basic questions you could ask may fall under things like, what is your understanding of what we need to be doing around privacy and security? How much do you know about the privacy rule or the security rule, or the safeguards that are under the security rule, and those types of things? You can ask specific questions just to kind of gauge what their actual knowledge is. Is it just technical knowledge, or do they understand how the pieces fit together? Because from a technical standpoint, I can come in and make you secure, but that doesn't make you compliant.
Right.
And from a compliance officer standpoint, you can hit compliance and get that kind of under wraps, but that doesn't make you secure either.
Right.
And so they're two completely different things.
Tell me a little bit, what was it called again? The CHMSP?
CHMSP.
If someone is, part of an MSP that's listening, where can they learn more about that?
So you can go to HIPAAforMSPs.com, and there's some information there. And the accreditation firm is called American Institute for Healthcare Compliance. So you can go to AIHC you can put me on the spot. These dash things, I can't get them.
Make you look it up.
Yeah, AIHC-ASSN.org.
Oh, okay.
So it's American Institute of Healthcare Compliance, but they're the ones that actually have the certification.
Okay, great.
We provide the training, they provide the mock exams and the full exam and the certification, and you have to have CEUs and the whole 9 yards, because it is a healthcare certification.
So as an MSP, you really have focused on the HIPAA world and healthcare world for the work that you do. I've talked to a few MSPs who they kind of think security, and are unclear on whether they need to know more about HIPAA. Why do you think it's important to have a knowledge of HIPAA if you're going to be serving organizations that need HIPAA compliance?
Well, when you look at HIPAA and what it provides, and there's arguments on this, but basically what it's looking at is how can we protect patients?
Right.
And when you protect patients in In our world, you protect it through protecting their data. And so it becomes a conversation about patient care and patient safety, not about data, not about compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not looking at it as in the lens of we're protecting zeros and ones. I look at it as I'm protecting, my fellow neighbors and people that are going to these healthcare practices. That's who I'm protecting.
Mm-hmm.
And it changes the conversation, in my opinion, a lot. And by looking at those things and understanding what do my clients actually have to have so that they're not in a constant state of breach, or so that they can stand in front of either a lawyer on the stand, in front of an insurance adjuster, in front of their own patients, and be able to prove that they're doing things that are reasonable and appropriate within their environment is important. If OCR comes in, one of the first things they're going to ask during an investigation is something like, show me your last 3 years of security risk assessments.
Mm-hmm.
Show me your policies and procedures. Show me your documentation from your IT company about all your security for the past 3 years. And if you don't have any of that, you don't have a leg to stand on, because if it's not documented, you have no proof that it ever happened. And
they won't just take your word for it.
No, I don't think so. They're not in the business of doing that.
So as you've been carrying on these conversations in the MSP space and educating MSPs about HIPAA, what are some of the misconceptions or misunderstandings that you commonly run into from other MSPs?
So oftentimes people think, well, if you just sign that HIPAA form they give you, which is, which you're already going, I'm scared. You don't even know what the term is for this.
What is it? It starts with a B. It's the form.
Right. So yeah, your business associate agreement, a lot of times they feel like, well, if you just sign the business associate agreement and you put in quote unquote good security, that's all you really need to do. And there's so many more aspects of that completely get missed. It's a lot more than that. Just one simple thing to look at is, for example, if you have a ransomware attack, IT often can come in and say, all right, we got to get you back in business as quick as possible. Let's completely erase the machines and reinstall Windows and get you back up and running. Which is, when you don't take compliance into consideration, you don't take HIPAA into consideration, that's certainly a path forward that you could take.
Mm-hmm.
However, when you look at, well, what does HIPAA require me to do? Well, from my client standpoint, HIPAA is saying you need to be able to prove whether or not there was a low probability of compromise of that data.
Right.
Well, I can't, because I just had my IT guy destroy all my evidence.
There's nothing to forensically investigate.
Exactly. So just something minor like how do you handle a situation like that? It's a very different lens you look at when it's like, I'm handling this through the lens of technology or IT or just security, versus I'm handling it through the lens of what my clients really need to be able to do, which is I need to be able to prove a low probability of compromise, or if I can't, then now I got to go down my breach notification path.
Right. One of the other ones that I see a lot is a misunderstanding around encryption, whether or not information has to be encrypted. Can you speak to that at all? Have you seen that as well? Yeah.
That's always a tough conversation to have, because it can be confusing, because you've got encryption at rest, encryption in transit. What is encryption? How does it work? You've got people who say, well, I've got my hard drive encrypted, so all my data is encrypted. I'm like, yes, but no.
Yeah, exactly. How effective is that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it is encrypted, but you have to understand that if it's full disk encryption, it's really only helping you when that hard drive is, accessed. Like if you pull it out and try to put it on another computer, you can't get to it, or if the computer is completely turned off or whatever. But if you're actively using that computer, then it is in an unencrypted state. Right. And so if I'm able to pull data out of that machine while it's in an unencrypted state, then the data is still unencrypted.
Right. And I agree with you. It's one of the most confusing conversations that I have with people as well, because when you start saying, all right, where do you have the data stored and how is it encrypted? And the answer you get is very high level. It means either you're talking to the wrong person, or it's perhaps is only encrypted at the disk level. And so digging into how about the table, how about the column, how about the field, right? So to what degree and who's taking care of that? I think depending on whether you're doing it on your own and having an MSP help you, or whether you're using a like one of these big EHRs or something. So just finding the information where it's residing in systems, I find that to be one of the most difficult starting points for any conversation about how are you protecting your information.
Yeah. The first question is, where's your information?
Yeah.
And I always love the answer when I get our data is only in the EHR, and I'm like, so far I've not had anybody been able to prove that that's true. Let's you prove it to me, and we'll be good. But I have a sneaky feeling that you can't fully prove that, and usually I'll just start asking some questions. I'll say things like, do you ever download PDF files for like your EOBs and things like that? And they're like, oh,
yeah.
It doesn't take long before you hit something and they go, oh yeah, man, I didn't think about that.
Or one of the common ones I see is, do you have home visit personnel? Do they go into people's homes? Are they gathering information while they're in their homes? How are they gathering? Is it on paper? Are they typing it into a tablet? Where does it go from there? And I don't mean just it gets tucked into my bag and then into my car, although that is important information as well. But then how do you get it from where it originates into the EHR? And it's almost like that entire pathway is not considered. And if you think about it, if an organization isn't looking at their personal knowledge of where their information is, they cannot properly state that, how is an MSP supposed to help them?
That's a tough one, because you start getting into areas. I like to put our services kind of in 3 different buckets. I just had this conversation before this podcast with a client. If I'm looking at 3 different buckets, there's the done for you bucket, there's the done with you bucket, and there's the it's all on you bucket. Like, I'm not helping you with this at all because it's not, under my purview. And so that becomes a conversation to be had about where we have to draw the line of when we get involved. When do we help you do it? When do we do it for you? When is it all on you to do? And I think that's one of those conversations that has to be had depending on where that data resides and who has control over it, and how it's even moved, like, for example, into the EHR, because data, unfortunately, you can just copy data, which means now it still resides where it was and where you put it. Right. And so you can, somebody's like, oh, I just copy all the data into the EHR. Okay. Did you copied it or did you move it?
Yes. What happened to the data that existed before it is it still there? And suddenly it proliferates. And then it's everywhere. It's on laptops. It's in file servers. It's in, the email.
Yeah. It's like the gremlin you drop the water on and like, where did all of them go?
Oh, you'll find out. It'll when bad things happen, then you'll know where it went.
Yeah. And so you start having, data creep basically is what you get into. And that data creep is where you'll have the data that it ends up on your phones and it ends up in other people's documents folder. And sometimes people email it to themselves, or they'll put it in some other online file sharing application or something like that. And oftentimes those things are hard to find unless you've got some other kind of, third party service that's going to help you keep track of that. It's very difficult to know where that data ends up. Yeah.
Yeah. Because the fact is that digital data is so easy to move. It's easy to move. It's easy to proliferate. And it's hard to find it once you've put it somewhere odd. So.
It is for sure.
So is there, as an MSP, have you had some successes in helping organizations kind of get their arms around this? What does like a successful use case look like for you?
So for us, one of the things that I think we do a really good job of is drawing the line of where we stop and where another piece begins. One aspect that I see often is that an MSP might come in and say, we can do your full security risk assessment. We can handle your full compliance program. I mean, maybe, but I haven't seen one yet.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I don't even want to cross into some of those areas. Like, I really want to be very clear of what I'm helping that client with and what I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
And so you mentioned Cardin earlier. We partner with Cardin all the time to come in and do those other pieces, like the full program. Because honestly, if you don't have anything, if you don't have a program in place at all, you're looking at probably an 18 to 24 month process.
Yeah.
Like that's way outside of my scope as your IT vendor.
Yeah. And it's intensive. I'm glad. So Cardin, and people might know this, Cardin is Donna Grindle's company. So if you have a healthcare organization that needs help doing the things, doing the IT things, they would go to you. And if you need help putting that program in, that intensive, work with someone to put that in, that's Cardin. We don't do either of those things at SecurityMetrics. What we do is we'll come in and do an assessment, and like this analysis of risk, that annual security risk assessment that needs to be done, we're very good at that. We're especially good at that for business associates in highly technical environments. That's really where we shine, right? And so, like you said, sometimes I'll get customers who say, but I need help with this. I need help with policy and procedure development. I need help with finding our data. I need help with like various things they need help with. That's not what we do. And so we're very clear on what we do and what we don't do. And I think that is, it's really useful to organizations that are looking for that help, because if they don't know exactly what they're getting, they might make assumptions and then have gaps in their program or gaps in their ability to meet their obligations under HIPAA.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So to kind of deep dive a little bit into the HIPAA language, what HIPAA says, one of the things that I run into, both with IT folk who are internal to an organization and with MSPs, is HIPAA has this thing where some of their requirements are required and some of them are addressable. Can you maybe go into a little bit about the difference between required and addressable? Because here's the issue that I see is, you tell an IT person, well, it's addressable. They think it's no longer required.
Yeah.
So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I almost wish they would change that verbiage a little bit. So what I like to tell folks is it's all required.
Yeah.
But the ones that say addressable, it simply means that you can look at those and decide what type of compensating control you want to put in place. So it doesn't necessarily have to look exactly like the things that are required. Like required is, okay, it's got to look like this.
Yeah.
It's got to function like this. This is what the addressable things. It's like, okay, we don't necessarily have to do it this way, but we do have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that actually is another reason why the encryption requirements are they become even more confusing for people, because some of the regulations that are around encryption under HIPAA have the word addressable under them. And so then people say, well, that means I don't have to encrypt my data. And my response to that is usually, well, you're going to have a breach.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just, again, it's look at all of it and, okay, every bit of this stuff is required to do. Now, how we're going to do it is where you can start interjecting, well, what's reasonable and appropriate, and having those conversations, because again, size of your organization, the capabilities, technical capabilities, revenue plays a role in it. So all those things.
Yeah.
And you can't say, well, we can't afford to spend $5,000 a year on XYZ, but we can get brand new furniture every year or something like that. OCR is going to look at all that if you have an issue.
Yeah.
So you can't get away from that way.
And we can actually see what OCR cares about in terms of the rules and kind of places value on based on when a settlement happens. They release the information about it. They'll straight up talk about, these are the things that are not in place. This is the the corrective action plan that has to happen. What would you say is the number one thing they always talk about first?
Oh, it's a security risk assessment not being done properly.
Yeah, it's not even a question, right? Security risk assessment.
Yep, every single time. And, in fact, they've got their latest push forward that they're doing is on trying to figure out how to resolve that issue. So one of the things they've been doing for quite a while is the patient right of access. So they've had a campaign going trying to help resolve those issues. And just recently they threw in there, okay, here we got a second campaign going, and it's going to be on having a proper and thorough risk analysis. Now, how they're going to do that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because, with patient, with the patient right of access, they get complaints from patients because they didn't get their records within a timely manner. Now, how they're going to get notified about the security risk assessment, or maybe they're just going to continue doing business as usual, but they're just going to make a bigger example out of those who don't have the risk assessment done right. I'm not sure what that's going to look like, but that is, their next initiative.
Yeah, because it's not like you can go into your doctor's office and say, hey, can I see your annual security risk assessment? They're not going to say, okay, that's not going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I wish there was a way to easily go in as a patient and go in and say, how do I know that this practice is taking my data seriously, or the protection of that data? There's not a good way to really do that. You can't look at it and go, oh, their computers look nice. Oh, it's like none of that matters. No. There's a few things you can do just to kind of get some kind of idea. Like you can look at their notice of privacy practices. Do they even give them to you at all? And maybe read them and see what it sounds like. For me, like I know what I'm looking for. Yeah. So there's things I'm looking for. If I see anything anywhere that says we're HIPAA compliant, I'm like, oh gosh, they already don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, because you can't say that. You can say that you're acting in a HIPAA compliant manner, maybe, but
yeah, but I've seen.
But if they have a certificate, you're in trouble.
I have been in places that had a certificate on the wall that says, annual certificate of compliance. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you don't even have a clue if you think that's the way that works. And, if I ask somebody at the front desk, like, who's your privacy officer or who's your security officer? And they look at me like, what? Who's your compliance officer? And, that tells me that they're not, either they don't have one or they're not doing any kind of training with their workforce, so they understand, who do I even go to when I have questions about privacy, security, compliance?
Right.
What do I do when something happens that is a privacy issue, security issue, or compliance issue? They don't know any of that.
Yeah.
If I ask somebody and they can't give me that simple answer. Yeah. So there are ways you can kind of gauge it, what the maturity of the organization is with that. But it concerns me. And in my small town, I know there are some places I just won't go for healthcare, right? Because it is so bad, and that I just know they're not protecting the data, and I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, well, and it's unfortunate because the last thing you want to do is if you're seeking healthcare, you're already kind of in a vulnerable state, and then if they're not taking care of your data on top of that, that just makes it makes it hard to focus on what you should be focusing on.
Yeah, it does. And some folks kick into that, well, my data's been breached so many times now, it doesn't really matter. But you go through one of these incidents where your data is used, or you have credit cards taken out in your name, loans taken out in your name, your identity is stolen. If you go through that, you'll have a completely different attitude. It is terrible to have to go through. And imagine if your healthcare records are not accurate anymore because you've had some kind of issue with that. Yeah. It's hard enough to deal with it when your credit report's not right.
Right.
So imagine if your healthcare records are wrong. Right. Those are hard to get changed. Very difficult to get changed.
Yeah. So I think that the value of an MSP as a good partner, it seems self-evident, and leaning on an organization like yours to really make sure that those pieces are in place, and you can give your patients kind of a peace of mind over it seems worth the effort.
Yeah. Well, you don't know what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And people often are already kind of confused with IT and cybersecurity as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Throw in how that mixes together with compliance, and it's like, here's a soup full of mysterious things that make no sense.
So if you have an organization that is looking at and thinking about, I think we're growing, we need help, we need to look at a third party, where do they start? What's a good starting place for them?
So you're talking about they're looking for an MSP?
Yeah.
Well, certainly I would say call me, but if you don't,
that is a given.
if that's not an option for whatever reason, then I would look for those that might be advertising within your space.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in healthcare, look at healthcare. If you're in financial, look in financial. See if there are those firms out there that seem to understand your space a lot more than the average person does, the average IT firm does.
Do you think geographic location also plays into it?
In IT, it doesn't much anymore. We've got clients all over the United States, and there are some clients we've had for years and never even physically been to their office or even met in person.
So you're not taking care of their printers?
Well, I mean, it's amazing how much we can do remotely anymore. And if we don't, any good MSP that's been around a while usually has a network of other MSPs that can call on.
Oh, for sure.
Because they've been in the industry long enough, they develop relationships or they're part of peer groups and such. So I know anywhere in the United States, and honestly, probably anywhere in most of the world, I probably can get somebody boots on the ground just because I'm a member of so many different organizations that I can reach out to if I need something like that.
Well, that is some really good information. Before we wrap it up, do you have any last pieces of advice for people?
No, I would just say, just be careful, be aware of what it is you're getting, and ask questions. And it's okay to be skeptical, and it's okay to not trust, but verify.
Mm-hmm.
And don't fall into the trap that just because somebody has other clients like you that they know what they're doing. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. So.
Well, I sure appreciate your time today. Thanks very much for talking to me.
Well, thanks for having me, Jen.
Yeah, we'll talk to you again. Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of SecurityMetrics Podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.